Section 9.1, square roots. First off, talking about square roots of perfect squares. That square root symbol means to find the square root, which is finding the number that, when multiplied by itself, equals the given value. Perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and on. Those values are found by taking a number and squaring it or multiplying it by itself. Some properties of square roots. The square root of 0 equals 0. You cannot have a negative sign underneath the radical. So the square root of negative 9 does not exist in the real numbers. The only time the answer is negative is when there is a negative in front. So the negative square root of 16 equals negative 4. To evaluate square roots, we just look for the number that, when multiplied by itself, equals the given value. So the square root of 49 equals 7, since 7 times 7 equals 49. For the square root of 1 over 81, I can look at the numerator and denominator separately, so we get 1 over 9. Now, a common mistake here is to want to keep going, just to let you know, this is not, you don't do it this way. All right, 1 over 81, and then what some students then think is that it's going to actually end up being 1/3. But that's not the case. Once you solve the square root, it's not there anymore. And then 0.09, the answer to that is 0.3. When you have a decimal, you have the number of decimal digits. So what I mean by that is there are 2 digits behind the decimal point, so our answer only has 1 digit behind the decimal point. If we had, if we had 4 digits behind the decimal point, 1, 2, 3, 4, our answer will have 2 digits behind the decimal point. Negative square root of 64 is going to be negative 8. When we have squares and square roots, they are inverse operations and will cancel. So the square root of 6 squared is just 6, or the square root of 6 with a squared on the outside is also 6. The answer to a square root will always be non-negative. Non-negative means 0 or bigger, just like absolute value. And a couple of extra examples or rule type things here. The square root of negative 8 in parentheses squared is going to equal 8 positive, because negative 8 squared is negative 8 times negative 8, which is positive 64, whose square root is 8. If I don't have those parentheses, then there's no solution, because you don't have the square root of negative 8. It doesn't exist. Even if the square root was underneath, right next to the 8, it still doesn't work. And so what that kind of leads us to is a new rule with absolute values and variables. If you have the square root of n, or whatever variable squared, it's going to equal the absolute value of n, because we don't know if n is supposed to be positive or negative. And so to make sure that it works okay with square roots, we have to use absolute value to make it positive. So in this example, when we simplify, the squared and square root cancel out. The squared and square root cancel out. This one, the squared and square root cancel out, but not quite. It's going to be a positive 17, just like these 8s up here. This one is absolute value of n. Since we don't have an actual number to put in there, we just leave it absolute value of n. Letter E, squared and square root are going to cancel, so we have this expression of 5x minus 3. And since x is a variable, we need to put absolute value on our answer. Evaluate, so we have just a little bit of order of operations mixed with square roots. So negative 2 times 5, which is negative 10. We have 12 plus 5, which is 17. We have the square root of 169, which is 13. Parts B and C emphasize the point that you cannot split up a square root over a plus sign because you get different answers. And part D, order of operations, says multiply 4 times 3 times 2, which is 48. Square root of 1 is 1.